All right. Thank you, Alvin, for being here for this little interview for my channel. I'm just going to ask some questions about your experience in the music industry and primarily talking about Dolby Atmos. So yeah, let's get right into it. First, maybe you can just tell us a bit about yourself, your experience, how you got into the music industry in America, in Los Angeles, right? Coming from Malaysia, that must have been quite
Right.
an experience.
Well, thanks, Rishabh, for having me. A little bit by myself. I'm a score mixer. I'm a recording engineer. I'm a producer, and I mix music for film, TV, and records. And I came to LA via obviously originally from Malaysia, and I went to school in the States in Boston actually, in Berkeley School of Music back in the day, and then after college, after I took my music production and engineering degree, I was debating where to go, and lots of people said, "Hey, come out to LA. There's things to do." So, I moved out here. I came, and we did. Everyone does what they do to come out and try to figure out what their life is and all that. And I decided, you know what, LA is where I want to be. And so I told them, sure, I'll come out, visit it, and then started, working for record producers out here, and then, slowly started doing, records for people, and while on the side producing my own things, and then, getting into mixing and getting in the film world, learning how to mix for film and learning to mix for surround, but like music for film rather than like, any of this like dialogue or anything. And then kind of going in between like the song world and the score world in terms of music, but with the experience of working in surround. So when it came time to, as like we were talking about here about Dolby Atmos, when it came time when Dolby started going from the film world into the record world, that's where it it was a very natural extension for me.
Nice, that's pretty cool. Since of your background with working in the music world, so you were producing albums with bands, and then got into the film soundtrack world as well. Now, you're doing all this stuff in multi-channel audio. So I'm just curious, when you were studying, so you studied MPNE, right? The Music Production and Engineering program at Berklee College of Music. Did you study that at school? Were they teaching you multi-channel mixing?
There was a little bit of that, when I first came out, we had maybe a class about it. It wasn't a thing yet. It wasn't like, oh, here's this hot new thing. We were told in school, like, you're in a very interesting kind of crossroads in the industry where we don't know where things are going. With like streaming just coming to be, and CD sales were declining at that point, and vinyl wasn't coming back really yet, and they don't know where things are going. So I learned a little bit of it, and we took a tour of a couple of studios in Los Angeles at that point. From a few classmates of ours, we came out to LA from Boston, from the music production and engineering wing of the school, and then we ended up in the Sony lot here in Los Angeles, in Culver City, and we were at the dub stage where they do the final, what they call dubs, or final mix for films, where they combine the music, the dialogue, and the sound effects and whatever else. It's like kind of like a giant theater with a big console in the middle. And they said, we want to play you this Dolby Atmos thing, and it's this new technology, and you have speakers overheads, and it would be really cool. And at that point they said there's going to be a lot of usage, or like they have a lot of ideas for using this technology. So I said, okay, let's just check this out. And you go up, and they play this. They obviously have their trailer, and there's a visual and whatever, and they do helicopter sounds and like leaves spinning and all that. And at that point, it was more sound effects driven, right? It hasn't really kind of gotten hold on the like music world yet, but it was kind of a great demonstration, like the possibilities of it with the technology. And then, couple maybe like 12 years later, here we are, and it's exploded, and everyone's trying different things, and we're trying to move this forward, and it's getting into cars and all that.
Yeah, that's true, actually. It's quite a bit of little bit of a culture shock for anybody who's used to, if you talk about music, right? It makes sense for films or any kind of multimedia, but for just album production, it feels like, what is going on here, right? Because it's usually you're used to this whole stereo world, and now this whole multi-channel thing. So let's get right into that, this whole Dolby Atmos thing. I know very little about it, but essentially, can you talk about like the fundamental, the simplest setup you can get for a Dolby Atmos listening environment? Like how many total speakers, how many total channels,
Right.
speakers?
Okay, so Dolby Atmos, just in general, is a multi-channel setup that goes from the front of your listening environment to the rears, the top, in a way where the sound envelopes you in kind of like a dome, right? The least you can get away with is five speakers on kind of your listening plane, and then you get one sub and then two speakers on the top. So a 512 is like the very basic of what you can do, so that you can have a front experience, you have a rear experience, and then you have a top experience, and you have the sub to supplement all of that. And it can go all the way up to, I've heard of 11.6, and at some point, you go from not discrete speakers to like what they call line arrays, and that's kind of blurring the lines between the multimedia film / live world, which is a whole different thing now, where they're doing this for live as well, where they set up this, you go into a arena and they have like Atmos for you to listen to, like big EDM festivals or whatever. But for records, 512 is where you start. And I think the really common one these days is like a 714. And you go up as a mixer. I do find personally, especially with Apple Music and anything that has has their own kind of proprietary algorithm that you have to provide for, and we get into like all the deliverables and all that. But when they have their own proprietary things, having a 914 setup, I find has been the most ideal to get your mixes to translate. But you can get away with 512 in general.
Okay, so yeah, 512, 714. What is 91? You said 914.
914, yes.
9.1.4.
Yes.
So there are 9 speakers on this plane. Like, can you explain it? So left, center, right, then what else?
Right. So in a 514, you have a left, center, right, left surround, which is the left rear, and then right surround. And then you have left top, left top surround, the right top surround. When you go from 5 to 7, you're adding 2 side speakers. So you have literally just your plane here. So you have left, center, right again, left side, right side, left surround, right? When you go to 9, you're adding 2 more speakers to the front, where if you have one, let's say, I'm looking here, here's my left, my right, my center. So now I'm going to add one left surround, left wide, they call it, and right wide. So it's kind of a little further away from just your regular listening experience when you're facing the speakers. It gives you just a little bit of width there. And, with a lot of pop music in general, and with vocals, especially with vocal forward music, I should say, the width helps with, adding all these extra sizzle and excitement that you don't necessarily have in a just left, center, right. So it's kind of pulling the experience a little, a little closer to you, but not really on your side, and it gives you a little more like, I hate to use the word punch, but like just something that you can just give you an extra dimension in terms of depth of your mix.
Very cool. Now, from my understanding, from the listener's perspective, all this, you don't need to have this kind of crazy setup, right? It's all scalable. You can
Yeah.
even have it as simple as just headphones or have like a full home theater experience.
That's right. So I think these days you're trying to make it as simple in terms of listening experience for the end user, the listener. You're just trying to add on to their already kind of simplified experience and give them a little more value to what they're listening to. And with Atmos, what it gives you, like I said, is to give you a more immersive, which the word immersive audio seems to be the catchphrase of the season, where you feel like you're more you fall deeper into the music. You can listen deeper into music. You're more captivated by the music itself. So a lot of times, with streaming especially, you can listen to these pieces of music that is mixed in Atmos on your regular headphones. So whether you're on Apple Music or like you're on Tidal or you're on like Amazon, and I know, I don't know if Spotify is coming out with it yet. So when they do, what's going to end up happening is you'll have a stereo mix and then you have an Atmos mix. And the Atmos mix gives you the experience of listening to things in an environment where you can have things coming behind you, from the front of you, from the side of you, and even from above you. The technology is pretty cool. While I would kind of, without going too deep into like the technical aspects of it, you can use whatever headphones that you have, and all you do is click a button on your favorite streamer, and you get that Dolby Atmos experience or spatial audio.
Nice, very cool. Now, can we talk a bit about your setup? From my understanding, you started off by just hiring studios and going to professional studios that had a Dolby Atmos setup, but recently you've set up your own Dolby Atmos thing for your own home studio.
Yeah, that's right. So, my studio is, here in Hollywood. And I started out with just a pair of stereo speakers. And as I went on, and because I was working a lot in film music, I had what I call a 5.1 setup. So without the tops, but a surround setup with a subwoofer. As I went into Dolby Atmos, I am currently at a 7.1.4 setup. So, left, center, right, left side, right side, left surround, right surround, and then the 4 tops on the top, which gives me great coverage for mixing records. And like I said, I'm finding myself wanting those 9, and that would be the next logical step up. And since this is a hefty investment, and a lot of us are generally just working musicians, and we go along as we build. My next process in that chain would to get that wide, to kind of have that experience to mix there. Now, the question that always gets brought up is that, can you not mix if you don't have the wide? No, that's not true. It's very scalable, like you've mentioned. So you can actually do what they call like phantom images, meaning you don't have discrete speakers, and you can still figure out where, if that speaker was supposed to be there, how it's going to feel. The technology, or the way the technology works, is whatever amount of speakers you have, you're supposed to feel like if you take, any piece of audio, any source, and you cycle it around on there's a panel in the mixing software, like whether you're in Logic or you're in Pro Tools. And I don't know if Ableton supports Atmos yet, but I know Logic, Cubase, and Pro Tools does. You can take a source audio, and if you pull it out into your immersive field, it should feel like just a piece of audio that's floating around your head. So if I have a triangle and I want a triangle to go, around my head, and I drag it out and whatever, it should feel like someone holding that triangle and just going around your head, or holding it wherever in that field of where your speakers are. So when I mean scalable, I just mean that once I add those speakers, I can have actual discrete sounds coming from that speakers and do more things. Now, when it comes to my setup, I have actually a 724, which means that I have two subwoofers that functions as one.
Is that common to have two?
Some people do like it. It doesn't mean that more sub means more bass. It just means that I am able to spread the load of the two subs to it still functions as one, so technically it's one.
Okay.
But it's spread between two loads, so I get a little bit more control over the load. And I'm a big fan of the speaker brand that I use, so I kind of got two, and they have a brand.
Which one is it?
It's so I use ATCs. It's a small UK company, and I have the ATC 100s in the front and 25s all around. The SEM 25s, and ATC goes by I think their wattage rating, so they start from like the 20s, which are passive speakers, and they go 25s, so which is like 25, and then the 50s, which is the medium one, and then the 75s, the 100s, the 110s, and 150s. And the subs are 12-inch, like kind of custom enclosures that are built so that they can, I don't know exactly the technology, but they get it so close to the magnets that there's very low distortion at those frequencies. And that helps with good monitoring, and I believe good monitoring just means better translation, and it goes down the line for that. So very happy to have that as like my main setup, and eventually as I go along, I'm just gonna add more speakers.
Nice, that's very cool. So one day you're going to be surrounded by 128 speakers. 126.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking about that, so in Dolby Atmos, is it 128 discrete channels?
So yes, so there's this in the technology itself, because of how Dolby has designed this. You work in two different sample rates. You can do 48K or 96K. And they have these things called objects. And like I said, objects are just basically an audio source. And rather than have, more channels of audio, like rather than carry more channels of audio in your file, which just makes file sizes really huge, bigger, and not functional to transfer between things. And when people want to stream and, with internet and all that, you carry the information of the audio. So if you have one stream of audio and say, okay, this audio is going to go through all these speakers, the way it's thought out is that you use the information of where the position of that audio is within that sphere, and they give you 128 total what they call objects that you can use to do that with. And now, because not everything has to be an object, because you don't want everything to be metadata or just data without actual audio information, the 128 channels is divided into objects and beds. And beds are just kind of the cage or the framework of where your base audio sits. And that takes up maybe 10 channels of your objects, because they just give you that 128 to work with, right? And then the 129th one is a time code thing, which is, obviously from the technology of film and technology, broadcast, and, kind of having a master clock and, the all this technical jargon. So with that, you can have your bed be like your base thing, where you keep all your audios in fixed positions. And then you have objects where you can pull out certain interesting elements, whether it's musical or, whether the technology is for film, where you can do dialogue or whatever, and then use that to create interest in your mixes.
Nice. It's nice that you explained that, because my next question was going to be, can you talk about how you mix with objects versus music beds? I was reading a bit about the beds concept versus objects. So the idea is beds can have this 10 maximum in Dolby Atmos?
You can create, so each channel, your beds can be whatever. It can be the framework of your speaker, for example, right? So like, let's say if I have like for example, in my case, I have a 714. So I have total objects used would be 7 plus 1, which is 8 plus 4, which is 12. So that first 12 objects is my bid, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
those are like actually fixed into the speakers.
Okay.
And some people do like a 514 or whatever, and that's the bid. And the bids are, I think, predefined by what Dolby has as the renderer, the Dolby Atmos renderer. I think they go up to 916 now. I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember. This technology moves really quickly at this point because we're still at the precipice of trying to figure out where is it. It's starting to settle down. There's a little bit more information out there now. People are starting to figure out their own workflows. People are starting to figure out what works for them. People are starting to figure out what works for the listener. And they've defined what they need. So in the bid, the interesting thing is I think the bid's fixed at either 10 as the last time I've kept it, and I haven't updated my template yet. So it's 10 objects, and I can have like 3 bids if I want to, but I choose not to, right? So I just have 1 bid, and the reason I choose to have 1 bid is because I've created a different workflow for me, at least in the pop world, so that I can mess with the imaging of the entire mix. I mean, then it becomes like very customized to me and how I perceive the width of things and how I perceive what's behind me, what's above me. And that goes into like, very kind of interesting mixing techniques that all of us are still trying to learn and figure out. But the bid is the only way that I know right now that you can access the LFE channel. So you still need a bid to access the LFE channel. And, maybe if you want to go to your left and right, like that's absolutely, that's going to be your left speaker, your right speaker, right? And sometimes you keep your reverbs in those bids so that, that image never moves, and then you can move things around. And like sometimes when you mix, let's say you do a track with live drums and you have a kit, right? So in stereo, you just put your overheads left and right? That works. The kicks and down the center, snares down the center, hi-hat, whatever. With Atmos, you can do very different things. You can, do I want to put my overheads literally in the overhead speakers, or do I want to use my rooms and put that in the overhead speakers, or do I want to spread it out so that it feels a little wider and things like that? Then it gives you a lot more considerations. At the same time, like, are you going to mix that and then it becomes completely weird because like the listeners, there's certain expectations when it comes to pop music and even rock music and even indie music where, you're not going to pan your kick to the rear. I mean, I have heard a remix of, I think it was a Get Out track or something, and it was like specifically to feature like Atmos, and he did like, he has one of those like complex like breakdown parts, and he has like all the stutter stuff, and then his kicks would go from behind to the top to the rear, the front, and it just flies everywhere, and it creates interest. At the same time, it gives you a little bit of anxiety because you're like, I don't know how to latch on things, right? It's like kind of like free jazz. Like, I don't know where my chords are. I don't, I know where tonal center is and all that. So even with mixing with objects, the technology is really cool. It's still good to be able to kind of have things that people can latch onto, or listeners can like not get totally pulled out of a listening experience of the song.
That's pretty interesting. You were talking about a David Guetta remix?
I forgot what track it was, because like the labels were starting to put out a lot of Atmos things,
Atmos
and these people, and those were one of the, in my opinion, that I think was a Guetta thing, and it was one of the better remixes of the Atmos, because some of them they just like throw it into Atmos and like just make surround reverbs and that's it, right? And the thing is, you want to make it more of a experience. You want people to listen to it and say, oh my goodness, like that guitar solo just flew around, or like, oh, I have like backing vocals flying from the back, or I have like risers coming from the sides and like exploding in my head, or like, going from a chorus that's super stereo to like entire like thing. So I think people who like give a lot of thought to that, like even in the the K-pop world as well, they're like really kind of hammering in on like how to finesse this and how to use this for a great experience.
It seems like there's more possibility or leeway to do this in electronic music, right? Because you can, it's electronic elements. It doesn't have to be coming from a particular source. Well, the kick drum is an interesting example, but also it was probably just in a section of the song, not throughout the song, because that would be like too much, right?
Yeah, exactly. If you have a 4 on the floor, you keep it down the center, you put it to your LFE, and you kind of pull it. It's interesting because like the acoustic stuff, like when the Atmos of the Beatles came out, or like I have friends who like they work in Capitol, so I was fortunate enough to be in one of their rooms when they were like doing one. They were like playing back the Atmos mixes, and you try and listen to it and go like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. And like, you think about it in like, I am listening to it in actual speakers. Then you think about it as I am listening to it on my headphones. So a lot of times when I'm doing Atmos mixes, I'm not just sitting there on my, beautiful, gorgeous speakers, or some multi-million-dollar studio where they have like all these speakers and go, oh wow, this sounds incredible, and then you put in your headphones and you're like, this sounds like crap. The thing is to strike that to balance as well. You want to make sure that because primarily a lot of us now are on earbuds or like on like my headphones or whatever, so a lot of times you want to check so that it translates into like the algorithm of these headphones and how that converts into that, right? So I always have a headphone handy. I have like AirPods handy. I have like earbuds and like stuff that I know are technically stereo sources, but they have found a way to convert the Atmos into that. And it's been really kind of enlightening to see how people do that, from like across acoustic stuff to like electronic stuff. And like the electronic stuff is cool because you can do so much. And whether you're doing like, let's say, I mean, I can imagine the possibility of like a Telephone Tel Aviv album where it's like just all this like interesting like chops and like stutters and stuff, right? As opposed to like something that's like maybe synth, like very pad and drone heavy, and there's a little drone out, then maybe you can't get as much to happen. Who knows? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. But it's cool when you get like a electronic album where they really lean heavily to make a moment out of the electronic stuff, and like kind of going back to, I believe was a Get Out track, or was it Marshmallow track? Either way, it was the drop, right? It was the drop of the chorus that had all these treatments, and I was listening to it in a studio with huge speakers, and I could tell when it was behind me. Whereas if you're on headphones, you maybe have to make all these cuts a little more obvious and a little more choppy, and things that will help overemphasize that thing so that it translates to like something that's coming behind your head. And so far, that acoustic versus electric thing has been an interesting like exploration into this technology and where it's going to take.
Nice. Very interesting. So segueing into this whole acoustic, electronic world of production, let's talk a bit about Miracle. So the song that you have mixed in stereo as well as in Atmos for Natasha's album. So can you talk a bit about what was your process for that, for the Atmos one specifically?
Right. Well, I think, it all comes back to, first of all, getting the stereo right, and the production was done so well, and like the producer's mix was great, and all I did was just nip and tuck to make sure that we're all playing together. A lot of times when it comes to Atmos mixes, you don't want to stray too far from the stereo mixes if you didn't do the stereo mixes, and if you did, you can go back to the stereo mixes to see what you did to kind of just use that as your starting point in Atmos. And when I mix a stereo, and taking into account what the producers, your mix was doing, I kept in mind that I wanted to make this really Atmos. There was like some cool filtered stuff in the intro. There was some cool like ticky stuff underneath the tracks that I thought would be great to kind of pull out. And best of all, I think, when it comes to that wise, like I was saying earlier on, the vocal production of this is amazing. Natasha sang so well, and she had this like kind of thick, lush choruses with like kind of things coming in and out, and it was like, double and tripled, and there were all these sections that kind of gave you this like dimension in her singing. And I want to, like I said, make a moment out of it, right? So when she goes from like one phrase to another, like I tried to go from just the center to the wides to the sides and then back to the center, and it catches you when there are certain phrases comes out. So with that, it became very important to account for that. Meaning, when I was mixing in stereo, I made sure that these things were set in the pan in the stereo field, and then I took that and made sure that when they were in Atmos, they were pan in the surround field in a way where I felt would give that effect, right? So rather than just doing like panning, automating some pans, I made it a little more punchy, a little more obvious, because it was such a cool, like kind of smooth track that I would make it pop out from the side. So if you listen to it, in the chorus, you get these moments of like her voice popping out from the sides while she's singing here, and it just expands the track and gives you a little bit more more of an experience. And because the vocals are kind of so in your front, the rest of the track had to meet that. And rather than try to mix everything in Atmos in a way where it's always popping out here and there, I kept the track within that realm of the stereo field with a couple of elements that was mixed into Atmos with the original audio sources in the front, like the acoustic guitar, for example. Actually, the guitar stuff, I had them sitting in the front and threw a little bit of like room to keep them above you, so you hear a little bit on your head and a little bit of delay behind you, so you get a little bit of that front to back experience when you listen to it. So that give you the sense of space, and the excitement comes from the vocals. And that was the general direction I went in. I remember there were like some cool synth that I tried panning around. There was something that I was trying to get swirly in there. And the thing is, when you do swirly things, it's a little dangerous to do too much, because then the listener just gets confused, or just, I feel as a listener, I don't like that. So I had one thing, I think, in the bridge where it was just swirling a little bit. So I kind of just brought it up and a little bit down, and just kind of, give it that like warm wave of something that feels like it's coming in and coming back out. And that big explosion of the last chorus, I kind of brought, I dealt with a little bit of size and pulled the vocals out a little bit and just gave it this, my philosophy in mixing in general is even in stereo, you make it a little this, and a little this, right? So it means bigger, wider, bigger, and deeper. And I took that philosophy and I used that in this. And because I have an extension of a sub, I could add that sub. So if you hear that in Atmos speaker setup, it's an extra like with your kicks and the basses. I could kind of pull that down there and just have that little more extra effect that when you think about, like, when you see it, when you hear a trailer, or you go watch a movie and you have like this big booms, I try to have a little bit of that in the track as well, just to kind of emphasize downbeats of choruses or whatever, to help just give it that extra bottom end that you can hear.
Nice, very cool. Can we talk a bit more detail about the process? I specifically wanted to know about, so you talked a bit about, having the guitars in the front and then maybe having the room and all that stuff, or delays and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So you're doing this in Pro Tools?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So that's your main DAW?
That is my main DAW. I mix mainly in Pro Tools. I've done a couple mixes in Logic with Atmos as well. Okay. And I find, because just my proximity to Pro Tools and just using it every day, it's the easiest to do that. So you have to kind of set up Pro Tools with this thing called the Dolby Atmos Renderer, which you get from Dolby, and you connect them through like they have a link and all that, and you set it up so that it plays back, and it tells you what things to declare as objects and what things to declare as a bid. So I set up all my reverbs separately from just the track itself. And because they're objects. You're not really going through a final output. You're going through 128 outputs. You can't really just stick a limiter on there and then compress the entire thing and just go, oh yeah, that's what it is, you know. So there's a little bit of trickiness involved, so that when you bring a volume up, like if you limit something up, you're not technically doing that. You're just bringing. You're not just compress. You can't just compress that because it's not going through anything. But if you compress that and that doesn't trigger the rest of the track, then you're getting like this weird phasey thing. So there was a lot of trying to make sure, first of all, like anything that goes out to the sides and the rears and all that, I have them as objects, even though I can just put them through the bids. Because if I put them through the bids, like I don't have the freedom of just doing what I want. You know, I don't split them or whatever. I mean, it will pen in the bid, and the way the bid plays in the spatial audio versus the object, I think it sounds better in the object. So I rather have things in the objects. So my effects are as objects. My reverbs, even though it's a quad, I declare them as objects and I put them up there, but instead of putting them like on the four, like let's say if it's in a, you know, the way they visualize the entire Dolby Atmos thing is they visualize them as like a room. You're in a room and your speakers on the, you know, each corner. I can go, okay, I don't want that reverb to be on that total corner. I want that reverb to just be on the top here. It's just closer to where the person is listening to, or like closer to the front or closer to the back or whatever. I declare all four things in objects, and you need some creative routing or whatever. And then I can tell them where my image is, right? And then I can do whatever I need to. I can have weird plate reverbs exploding on the sides, which I did for, I think, like there was some hits that I think was like the snare or something. I had one part where I just had a little bit of that to come in. But in general, it was small, little subtle things to help fill out the space in a way that I thought would give it excitement without taking away from the song. When it came to those vocals on the side, rather than like panning it later on, I dragged them down to its own tracks. I remember kind of emailing you about asking for separate dry vocals, and the reason for that is because you know, when you process them together, you do like not you in general, but when someone processes that and you send it to a bus, it's easier to compress all of them. And because I can't do that, it's just physically, if I send it to a bus, then I can't separate them as two separate objects and put it to the side. I decided to, I had to like match what you did separately and declare them as objects and put them here, so that when certain words they come here and certain words they come to the sides, and things like that would help with just creating interest into your vocal. It's like people standing in different parts of the room and they're singing different parts. Then when it comes to like delays and like anything that a little more discrete in terms of the repetition, not like a reverb where it's just kind of a wash of a sound where you can hear like sparkles and all that. I do like the idea of a little movement in that in the space, so it's not just delaying in like a very stagnant spot. I can do it's kind of like a almost like an auto panner where it goes up and down a little bit, so it bounces up and down while it's delaying. So you have that pop of left and right, but you also have that up and down as the delays get thrown into it. And I put that in the rear, and it's a little more muted than most people, just so that it just tickles the ears from the back a little bit. It gives you just a little bit of just that depth. You're not hearing it all the time, kind of like a slap back from a building. It's that's what I was trying to do. It's very ghostly. It gives you that a little bit of that element. Now when it comes to compression and all that, and trying to match that with the original track, there was a lot of tricks that had to be employed just in general of how compression works, where you have a detector circuit where it takes all the audio to then compress, but if you compress everything with the same compressor and you do that detector circuit, does the compressor then is it a feedback loop? And you have to kind of think about how that hits that compressor and how that affects the entire thing, and do you want to do that? But there is also the element of the delivery of Dolby Atmos. They have a certain loudness standards that they require you to deliver on, and it may be good for certain people. It may be, some people may feel like it's kind of hampering their creativity. And I just feel like, personally, I think it's great that you can, you have these things to kind of work within, because then, more dynamic range. And I'm not saying like I would do a -5 loose any day. Sometimes, and also because I work in film, I know what a -18 sounds like. I know how much more low end you can get if you're monitoring at the right level. And in this track, I want to keep it pretty aggressive, right? I just it's such a great track, but it's so upfront. And so with that, I had to, rethink about certain things that I was delivering on, and like where my low end was going to sit, where things were going to do. And like, even with like the Fletcher Munson curves, if you compress, you're bound to listen to it a certain way because everything's just a little more upfront. Whereas if you have less, you have more dynamic range, then, even if you turn it up, you're going to hear certain things kind of move a little bit more, whatever. But with the standards that Dolby is trying to enact, and what Apple is trying to enact on all these stuff, it gives you a lot of ways to add weight, a lot of ways to add dynamics that you didn't think of. So I'm not compressing my entire mix. I don't do that. I don't have a bed that I compress as well. I can send it to aux. I can send everything through an aux and send it to my bed and call it a day, right? But there's no creativity there. The reality is you can do that and then compress that, and that's your mix, right? That's still kind of utilizing the Dolby Atmos technology, and you can pan within it. But then what if I decide that I want to go a little further and use an object, switch one to an object and pan it as an object? So I decide what the building blocks of the mix is, which is the rhythm section, always rhythm section, right? So I find a way to get my rhythm section to sit together. And because rather than using I still use beds, I use a bed in a way that utilizes auxes. And the thing, like I said earlier about declaring my reverbs as objects, I declare my bed as an object as well. So instead of using the Dolby Atmos bed, I use an object bed. And that's a whole way of like making use of objects and creating your own space, if you will. So with that, then I can go, okay, maybe my rears aren't completely all the way at the back, or, whatever it is.
Wow, I didn't even know you could do that, but that's that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a very fun way of creating your own image. And, on top of that, then you can go, okay, I can then compress it certain ways, and I can compress certain things, and I can send, there's a lot of side chaining involved to kind of keep things kind of happening together and have that interaction be happening. So there's still groups of things and whatever. And then on top of that, there's also the idea of how it translates to your headphones. So on the Dolby Renderer, there's this thing called the distance. There's a distance windows, where you can set certain objects to be how deep into the algorithm you go. Meaning, if let's say I was to set an object that there's off, near, mid, far. So an off means the object is just like where you are. And as you go further and deeper in the algorithm, it just feels like it's further in the room, right? And you can build your own object beds based on, I have a near object bed, a mid object bed, and a far object bed. I mean, we're going very deep into like all the other options, and I don't use all of them. I just use what I need. And the thing is, because it's going through your ears, going through an algorithm, and then messing the way you hear it, the deeper you go into it, there's the considerations of is this gonna sound like crap? And to be honest, the only reason I'll use like far is if I'm using effects and if I'm using smearing effects. There isn't a lot of multi-channel effects right now that I really like. Like one of my favorite things right now is there's this company called PSP, and they have the Oral series that comes out. They have a tool called the Oral, the Oral compressor that I really love. First of all, character wise, I haven't heard a multi-channel compressor that manages all your side chains so that you can determine how the compressor works with each other between the rears and the fronts and all that. Just an incredible tool. So when more people are starting to manufacture this and all that, I'm talking about like actual dynamic compressors and EQ. I mean, EQs you can use whatever you want, right? But there's tons of reverbs that are in multi-channel now, which is always the first thing that comes. But I'm looking to see more creative stuff to come out from that, so that I can figure out a way to do more interesting thing with my mixes. And these are all tools. So at the end of the day, it's about how you use them, but trying to solve for that like equal loudness over the thing. Maybe you need all your compressors to communicate with each other or whatever, and think of a way to do that. But as of right now, I can't find a way to do that. And I think using an object bit and like, for example, the Oral compressor has been like my way of tweaking what I need to.
So there are some multi-channel effects plugins out there that are usable. Can you list some that you use that you like using?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of my, like I said, in the PSP stuff, they've started really early with that, and they have a Oral control and Oral compressor. And Oral control is more like it's just having faders, and let's say someone prints sometimes I get like Atmos stuff from Air or like Abbey Road, and usually it's like orchestral stuff. And I don't necessarily think that the image is what I want in terms of the balance of left, center, right, surround, whatever. I can use an Oral control, and there's faders to balance.
Channels.
Yeah, and I can filter out certain things. And obviously the compressor, which sounds incredible. One of my favorite things to use in surround is this company that manufactures a lot of reverbs. I do really like the Tai Chi, which is one of my favorite surround Atmos reverbs. And that's one of the ones I use for effected reverbs, like chorusing, and like there's a little bit of distortion, and you can like get lo-fi sounds, and you can like get really long stuff and detuned stuff. So then you have like all this really great, I call them like just room reverbs, right? Like the Cinematic Room Pros, and you get great halls, you get great rooms, you get great chambers, and then you have the what's it called now? It's also from the same company, but it's basically, I always blank on that plugin, but it's a homage, and it's kind of the closest thing to a Bricasti, the M7. It's called Seventh Heaven. There you go, the Seventh Heaven.
What's the name of the brand?
It's Liquid Sonics. Liquid Sonics. Okay. Yeah, they do great reverbs.
And Tai Chi is the same company? Or is
yes, Tai Chi's under Reverb Foundry. I'm not sure if they're sister companies or they work together, or I think it's under the same umbrella of people. And Tai Chi is based off obviously another reverb that was like one of the original 80s surround reverb, and they sound great. Then there's also like, if you want to kind of do like an IR based reverb, then there's the New Gen Paragon that I've tried out and tried working with, and that's been really helpful. And then there's the the New Gen Halo Upmix, which is a way to take your, let's say, I take it for things that are not as defined, like pads, or like something that's drony, or something that's stretch out and kind of less transienty, to fill up a surround space, and the Halo Upmix is very, very good for that because it doesn't mess your face and is very, very, very quite transparent with doing that, and has like separate controls.
So upmixing individual parts, not like upmixing a stereo mix to Atmos, just taking individual parts and putting it into.
I can't say I've done upmix a stereo mix. I have seen people do that, and sometimes.
Really? So that plugin, you can do that. You can just feed it a stereo mix and it'll give you a Atmos.
It's not going to be really accurate, but at least it gives you an idea of what Atmos is. Yeah,
sure,
you can determine your low frequency and your high frequency. It's not going to mix the entire thing for you.
Sure. Yeah.
But you can kind of give it a little bit of width, and it smears it a little bit, but that's what like when you go Atmos without the individual parts. But I use that once in a while for, like I said, small little interesting elements in my mixes. Or upmixing reverbs is another way of doing it. So there's this upmixing, I think reverbs are some ways of using like ambiances and all that. And those are just, other than that, I don't really have any other multi-channel plugins that I'm looking for at the moment. It would be nice to do like some like detune stuff or like some chorusing stuff, and I'm pretty sure someone's gonna come out of that very soon, But as of right now, those are the few things that, I mean, these are tools at the moment, right? Tools that you need. I don't need auto-tune in Atmos. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think so. I don't see the benefit of it. But like, I think there are like there's some plugins, like I know Sound Particles come with things where it's like a delay. It would be great if there's a delay, honestly, where you can like, bounce around and all that. I know there's a company in New Zealand called Cargo Cult, and they do this thing called Slapper, and they'll do a surround delay. I don't know if they do an Atmos delay yet, but at some point, we are all people, my colleagues, myself included, and everyone who's still exploring this, they're going to find ways to work within this technology than people who are much more intelligent than us, who create all these wonderful plugins, are going to find a way to solve that issues for us. And, it's very fortunate to be able to help with the development of the oral compressor. And, like one thing I thought of is, it would be nice to have like a side chain thing, an external side chain thing, so that I can like, let's say if I want to duck my kick, like one thing I like doing is duck my kick drums on the entire mix, right? And that's very representative of electronic music, for example.
EDM world, yeah.
Yeah. So imagine having your entire room being sucked and doing this, and it'll be a cool technique. So it's nice to have like certain things being incorporated in and being brought in, and have that help people and help mixers and composers, producers and songwriters, so that the point is, the technology is not there to like stop people from working. It's supposed to help people with their creativity. So if it stops people from being creative, then there's not really a reason to kind of keep going.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it sounds like there's so many creative possibilities with this, and I'm sure in the coming years there's going to be a lot more multi-channel plugins and a lot more creative processing options in Atmos specifically.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I mean, obviously, like a producer like yourself, you can kind of see yourself maybe, trying these things out and see how that opens up different things. Like, I don't know if there's an LFO tool that will help things, and what can you do with that? And I can imagine if something comes out that has maybe a filter tool that helps. I don't know, like, you can close filters in certain parts and all that, or like kind of chain things, and that would change things as it goes along, and like cycles and all that. The basic thing is always auto pan, and everyone can pan. That's easy. You know what I mean? I would be curious to see, like, I don't know if there's I'm just shooting from the hip here, like a distortion plugin maybe, or like, who knows? There are reverbs, and I think there may be some cool reverbs to come out and all that. So let's see where it takes us and what it can do.
Yeah. So just kind of segueing into another part of this discussion. So this technology is available to producers, right? So Logic Pro has it, Pro Tools also has it, but let's say you're not using Pro Tools as a producer, maybe using Ableton Live. In Ableton Live also you can kind of do a Dolby mix if you really want to. So let's say someone has decided, okay, I would like to make my music in this Atmos platform. I would like to put it up on. So right now, Apple, Tidal, and I believe even Amazon is supporting this immersive audio
That's
Atmos
right.
thing. So what is the process? So let's say you've done your mix. What's the next step?
So after you export, the thing is, getting those loudness figures is very important, because a lot of DSPs and kudos to like these platforms, and actually people are trying to standardize something so that wherever you go you can listen to that, and Dolby is pushing very hard on, they have those numbers to make sure that you keep that. Labels will not take your music if you don't hit those numbers, because they'll just kick it back and say, hey, it's not right, and even DSPs will not take it. So after you've printed that, you've got all your mixes and all that, you print out the Atmos version of it and MP4's version of it, right? And then you deliver it to, let's say you are on I don't know if CD Baby does it, but like one of those, like, let's say you're an indie creator and you've printed that mix, you can use on these sites, on this like self-publishing sites, there are options for you to upload the Atmos version now. And Atmos comes up as it's technically a WAV file with metadata. So when I export it, I always label it as, I append the end of the file name with ADM BWF, which is the ADM Atmos is it Atmos Dolby Music or Atmos something. It's the master file for Dolby, and it's a broadcast WAV, so it's still a .wav, but when you upload it, these DSPs, or when they kind of publish it to the sites, they are able to decode them themselves with all this information. So you upload ADMD BWF and a MP4 for the Apple Music stuff, and Apple take it and they will then put it on the server, and they have their players, or the way they distribute it on Apple Music has the option to do that. In terms of publishing it,
so there are two files you need to upload.
Yeah.
Okay.
For Apple Music, I usually deliver both. I'll deliver that ADM and I'll deliver MP4, just so that there's no confusion on what to do, and you are able to listen to it. Because when I print for approvals, for example, you want to check it, you make sure that it's the, again, because it sounds different in different like softwares, like Tidal or whatever. You have to make sure that it translates all across. And I usually try to be more conscious about what Apple Music is doing, because Apple is, they're pushing really hard on the Atmos stuff as well. Or not Atmos, sorry, they're Spatial audio, Apple Music Spatial audio. So I make sure that my mixes on Spatial audio works with the MP4s. It's a different algorithm, so it's gonna translate differently. There's different filters, there's different, the way they compress and all that. So I just make sure that it works, and then when I upload it to those DSPs, it's separately.
Nice. I would love to see in the future, we talk about like plugins, having these tools to help us do this better. Maybe in the future, in a program like Ozone, Isotope Ozone, where you can hit a button and hear an MP3 version of your track just to hear what it sounds like. So maybe there'll be an Apple Dolby Atmos version, so you can hear what their algorithm would sound like before you upload it, right? That would be kind of helpful.
Yeah, that would be very, very helpful, actually. I mean, these all these plugins and showing how how they work and all that. I know on the Dolby Renderer, for example, when you bounce it out, let's say from Ableton, you do an Atmos mix, you bounce it out, you send it off, you put it into the renderer to export all your additional different things. I hope that they are able to add in ways to put in the plugin, so you can just monitor them instead of having to bounce it out, bounce the MP4 out, bounce the WAV out, then listen to that.
Every time you have to keep bouncing 4 different output files.
Yeah, exactly. And then you determine your binaural settings and stuff like that. Yes. So, And and also like the binaural setting sticks with your, like, when I talk about binaural settings or like the near and far and all that, that's very custom to each mix. It's not something where it's fixed to like Apple Music or whatever. So let's say on this mix, I have, object 29 and 30 as far. On the next mix, I can have object 2930 as off, just because I don't need it, So it's all very dependent on each mix, and that gives you customizability, and that gives you, I guess, creativity if you see it that way.
Nice. Yeah, it's great. Wow, so much we've learned. At least I have learned about mixing in general, and also mixing in Dolby Atmos. It's not easy, and it's pretty incredible that you're doing this, just figuring it out on your own. And being very successful at that. Yeah, that's awesome.
I wouldn't, honestly, if any piece of technology, the only way it's moved forward is someone breaks it, right? So I'm not saying I'm trying to break it constantly, but you try to push it as far as you can, and you try to see, you take it and you get feedback from the world and what the world thinks about it, and they go, okay, maybe this is not for me. And I mean, multi-channel audio for music has been around for a long time, and I understand that some people are still a little reserved about it, and some people are like, oh, we should go into it. And because, like, yes, I may be talking about Dolby Atmos. At the same time, look at Sony. Sony's coming out with Sony 360, and there's like some other new technology coming out. And each time they're trying to make it immersive. The whole point is to get you to feel a little bit more. And I think a lot of part of this may be used for, say, video games. I think it's going to be a huge thing in video games, right? Because
definitely,
like you're on your headphones all the time.
Yeah.
But you want like imagine like being able to hear, like, let's say you're playing Mario Kart or whatever, and like your car is coming from behind and like zooms past you. I think that'd be really cool, And to get to that point, I think you need to be able to go, okay, we've spent X amount of dollars, we pushed it on every platform. This is the adaptability. We have the data to prove that maybe people are reacting to this or reacting to that, or whatever. And we know this is going to work this way. We know this is going to work that way. Then, you can start kind of placing in the waves, right? I mean, CDs didn't take, and CDs are 44 and 16-bit. People didn't bother from that to go to like, oh, right, MP3s on Apple Music to like, now, I don't know where the car thing is going. I just heard that that's coming up like recently. So hopefully it becomes a thing, so I don't know, but it's fun, and the technology is cool. I'm learning it. I don't necessarily use it every day. Not everything's Dolby Atmos, but it's good to have that, and it's good to use that to kind of employ flex a different part of the creative mind, and also to explore like how you can expand on the music that is there.
And also employability, right? So if someone is a mix engineer who's just doing stereo, they won't get the Atmos gigs. You're doing both, so you get double the gigs, right? Technically,
Exactly, yeah. So then there's also that part, and obviously with the industry and how competitive it is, it's always good to be able to do both. And I've done Atmos for like pop music now, and I've also done Atmos for like film music, for like not into the movies, but like taking the soundtrack and mixing them in Atmos to go on Apple Music. So also a different thing, different way of thinking about it. But like, you get all of that, and the more you do it, the more you get to learn. And it's still kind of a wild west, to be honest, if you ask me, when it comes to that part. But knowing the basics of mixing, knowing the basics of how technology works, and knowing the basics of how people perceive music, I think helps and gives you a little bit of an edge. And I'm glad to kind of get started when I did, and then adopting it as part of a vocabulary, if you will. And if I use it, great. If I don't use it, like, it's no harm, no foul. But I'm glad to use it on Natasha's track, and I think it came out really well.
Yeah, absolutely. It came out brilliantly, and
Yeah.
thank you so much for doing that. It was great. We were just having a chat about mixing, and then you were like, "Oh, we could do a Dolby Atmos mix." I'm like, "Yay, that would be great, awesome."
No, it's absolutely cool, and I
Yeah,
hope that more of this stuff gets done, and there's always creativity to be done, and obviously we're always interested in seeing what we can do with it.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool, Alvin. Thank you so much. That was very, very helpful, very insightful. And yeah, so folks, everybody, this is Alvin Wee. We just had a long discussion about Dolby Atmos, the whole world of Dolby Atmos. I hope everybody found that helpful. Thanks again, Alvin.
Thank you, dude. Thanks, Rishabh.
You're a goddamn miracle.